Before I tell you what happened that night, I need you to understand something. I was not some stranger who wandered into the wrong event. I was not a plus one, not a distant colleague, not someone who slipped through a gap in the guest list. I was the woman who had been there from the very beginning, before the company, before the money, before the chandelier-lit ballroom and the 400 guests in their finest clothes. I was the woman who had held this man together when he had nothing. And on the most important night of his life, I was walked out of the building in front of everyone. But that is not even the most extraordinary part of the story. The extraordinary part is what happened in the 60 seconds after I stepped outside, when 3 black SUVs pulled up to that same entrance, and the man who stepped out of the last one made every single person at that door go completely silent. Stay with me, because what unfolded over the next several hours changed everything, and I mean everything, about what I thought I knew about loyalty, power, and what it actually means when someone shows you who they are. My name is Zara Mensah, and this is exactly what happened. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom smelled like money and fresh roses. I stood at the entrance in a forest green gown I had saved 3 months to buy. My invitation was printed on cream cardstock with gold lettering. My name was on it, Zara Mensah, right there in elegant font, proof that I belonged inside those doors. 400 guests were already seated beyond the marble archway. I could hear the gentle clink of champagne glasses, the murmur of polished conversation, the soft notes of a string quartet playing something classical and expensive. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. White roses were everywhere on the tables, along the railings, cascading from arrangements taller than I was. Everything was designed to say, this is the most important night of someone's life. That someone was my best friend, David. David Cole and I had known each other since we were 19. We met at university during a statistics class neither of us wanted to take. He was the nervous, lanky kid who forgot to bring a pen on the first day. I lent him one. We talked after class and somehow never stopped. For 13 years, I was the person he called at 2 in the morning when he was scared. I was the one who drove him to the hospital when he thought he was having a panic attack. I was the one who read every version of his business plan before he pitched to investors. I knew David Cole better than most people knew themselves. So yes, my name was on that invitation. I had earned my seat at that table 1,000 times over. The security guard stepped in front of me before I could cross the threshold. He was large, broad-shouldered, and he looked at my invitation the way someone looks at a suspicious smell, briefly and with discomfort. Before I could speak, I heard heels clicking against marble. Precise, deliberate, like a countdown. Mrs. Alina Cole appeared from my left. David's mother. She was dressed in champagne silk with diamonds at her throat, and she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had spent decades perfecting the art of cruelty wrapped in politeness. Her smile arrived before her words did. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, loud enough for the guests nearest the entrance to hear. "This section is reserved for family and close personal friends of the couple." She tilted her head. "Perhaps someone made an error with your invitation." I held it up. "My name is on it, Mrs. Cole." Her smile didn't move. "Security." 2 more guards appeared. I looked past them into the ballroom. David was standing 20 feet away in his wedding suit. Our eyes met across the marble floor and across 13 years of friendship. His jaw tightened. His shoulders stiffened slightly. And then he looked away. I want you to understand what that felt like. Not the embarrassment of being removed in front of 400 strangers. What hurt most was watching the man I had shown up for completely, for over a decade, choose to be a coward in a champagne suit. My invitation card slipped from my fingers on the way out. It landed face up on the marble floor. Outside, the night air was cool. I stood on the stone steps of the Grand Meridian, alone, in a $300 dress, with nowhere to go and no words left to say. I pressed my hands together to keep them from shaking. That was when the black cars arrived. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the hotel entrance in perfect sequence. Quiet engines, tinted windows, no music. They moved like a statement rather than an arrival. The doorman, The same ones who had barely acknowledged me straightened their jackets and stepped forward, not to stop the cars, to receive them. 6 men in dark suits stepped out of the first 2 vehicles. They didn't scan the crowd the way curious guests did. They scanned it the way soldiers check a perimeter, calm, practiced, covering angles. Then the door of the 3rd SUV opened. The man who stepped out was not what I expected. He looked to be in his mid-40s. Korean, lean, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than my rent for 6 months. Not a hair was out of place. He wasn't large or physically imposing, but the air around him changed the moment he stood up. The doormen didn't just acknowledge him, they deferred. One of them bowed slightly, the way you bow when you're not sure if you're supposed to but decide it's safer. Nobody asked this man for his invitation. Before you read any further, drop your location in the comments right now. Where in the world are you watching this from? I want to know. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that button right now, because this story is only getting started and you do not want to miss what comes next. I watched from the shadows near the stone pillar at the side of the entrance, still too hurt to move, too curious to leave. A valet near me leaned toward another and whispered something I only half caught. Reason this venue even has extra security tonight. I pulled out my phone to call David. Voicemail. I tried the bride, Sophia, David's new wife, who I had met only a handful of times and who always smiled at me with eyes that never quite smiled too. Voicemail. I typed a text to David. No reply. I was about to walk down to the street and call a cab when I noticed a woman in a simple black dress approaching me. She wasn't dressed like a guest. No gown, no jewelry. She walked with the quiet efficiency of someone who worked for someone important. You were removed, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. By the groom's mother. Yes. She reached into a small envelope and handed me a card. Plain white with a name embossed in silver. James Wu, nothing else. No title, no company. Mr. Wu would like you to come back inside, she said. I stared at the card. Why? She glanced back toward the entrance. He said to tell you it would be worth your time. I looked down at the card again. Then I thought about the cab I was about to call, the empty apartment I would go home to, and the image of David looking away. I thought about 13 years. I thought about the look on Alina's face, that cold, satisfied smile. I tucked the card into my small clutch and followed the woman inside. She led me through a side entrance near the kitchen corridor, past staff moving quickly with trays and linens, and into the ballroom through a door that deposited me at the far end near a row of private tables screened by low arrangements of white orchids. James Wu was already seated. Up close, he was even more composed than he had appeared outside. He had the kind of stillness that doesn't come from being relaxed, it comes from having nothing to prove. 2 champagne flutes were already poured. He gestured to the chair across from him. Please. I sat down because my legs were tired, and because something told me this was not a man who issued invitations twice. Tell me exactly what she said to you, he said. Not hello, not I'm sorry that happened, just the question direct and quiet. So I told him. I described Alina's smile, her exact words, the security guards, the way David had looked at me and then looked away. I kept my voice steady because I refused to cry in front of a stranger. When I finished, James Wu reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a slim folder on the table between us. He slid it toward me. I opened it. Inside was a printed profile. My professional headshot from a business conference in Accra 2 years ago, several press clippings about a small infrastructure project I had managed, and a short biographical summary that was more accurate than anything I had written about myself. I had this prepared when David first mentioned you, 6 months ago, James said. He spoke about you at length. He described you as the person responsible for introducing him to the West African supply network that made his company's expansion possible. I blinked. David told you about me. He considers you one of the most competent people he knows. James picked up his champagne, which makes what happened tonight particularly poor judgment on someone's part. I looked at the folder, then at him. Who are you? "I am David's primary financial backer," he said. "I provided the seed capital that launched coal industries 4 years ago. His company does not exist without my involvement." He paused. "And I did not drive 3 hours tonight to watch the person his business depends on be removed from a doorway." I looked up from the folder. Across the ballroom, Eleanor Cole had spotted me. I watched the color change in her face as she registered where I was sitting, her champagne glass tilted in her hand. James Wu had seen me looking. He turned very slightly, noted Eleanor's expression, and turned back. He said nothing. He simply lifted his glass and took a slow sip. He told me about Eleanor then, not as gossip, but as facts gathered the way a careful man gathers everything, quietly, thoroughly, and with patience. Eleanor Cole had been a woman of moderate means for most of her life. Her husband, David's father, had been genuinely successful, a mechanical engineer who built a small but stable logistics company. When he died 7 years ago, he left behind debts that Eleanor had never disclosed to David. She inherited the image of wealth but not the substance of it, so she manufactured the substance the only way she knew how, through her son. Every decision David had made in the past 7 years, his school, his career direction, his social circle, and ultimately his wife, had been steered by Eleanor. Not through force, through guilt, through carefully planted anxiety, through the slow erosion of his confidence until he believed he needed her judgment more than his own. Sophia, the bride, was not a coincidence. Eleanor had used a matchmaking consultant to identify her specifically, a woman with the right family name, the right social connections, the right appearance of a good match. What David believed was love was, at its foundation, a business arrangement his mother had engineered. I was the one variable Eleanor could not control, because I knew David before the constructed version. I had seen him when he was nothing. And people who have seen you when you are nothing are dangerous to people who are selling a polished image of who you became. So she moved to eliminate me. The only thing she had not calculated was that the man she wanted access to through her son's success was already sitting in this ballroom, and he had decided to sit across from me. David found me 20 minutes later. He had clearly been watching from across the room, working up the nerve to approach. He pulled me toward a small alcove near the side corridor, away from James Wu's table, away from the guests. He looked perfect in his wedding suit. He also looked terrified. "Zara," he started. "You watched," I said. "I know. You were 20 feet away, and you watched your mother have me removed. It happened so fast." "David," I looked at him, not with anger because the anger had already passed through me and left something quieter behind. "I have known you for 13 years. I read every draft of your business plan. I sat with you in a hospital waiting room when you thought your heart was failing. I talked you out of quitting 3 different times." I paused. "And tonight you watched." He looked at the floor. "I'll make it up to you." "No," I said. "You won't." I let that sit for a moment. "I'm not saying I hate you. I'm saying I finally see something I've been choosing not to see for a long time." He opened his mouth, closed it. I walked back to James Wu's table, and from the far side of the room, I saw Sophia, the bride, slipping away from a cluster of guests, heading toward me, with something urgent in her eyes I had never seen on her face before. Sophia Reyes reached my side and bent close to my ear. "I need to tell you something," she whispered. "Something about tonight that you don't know yet, about why my own mother isn't here." She pulled me away from the table to a quiet corner of the powder room, and she spoke quickly, the way people speak when they have been holding something in for so long that the release comes out almost involuntarily. Sophia's mother had refused to attend the wedding, not because of illness, not because of a prior engagement. Because 3 months ago, Sophia's mother had received a document, forwarded anonymously, that revealed the matchmaking arrangement. A payment made by Eleanor Cole to a consultant named Gerald Fitch, along with a detailed brief describing exactly what Sophia was supposed to provide. Family name recognition, social access to a specific set of business networks, and a physical appearance that would photograph well at events. Sophia had found out when her mother confronted her. I had already started to care about David by then, Sophia told me. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. He's not a bad man. He's a weak man who has been surrounded by bad decisions for so long he thinks that's just what life feels like. She looked at me directly. But I am not a product, and I was not going to walk into this marriage pretending I didn't know it began as a transaction. Then why did you go through with it? I asked. Because I want David to know the truth from someone who isn't trying to destroy him, she said. Tonight, I want to be the person who helps him find the version of himself that doesn't need his mother to function. I looked at her in the soft light of the powder room. This woman I had quietly resented for no good reason was, it turned out, the most honest person in this entire building. We walked back out together, and that was the moment I noticed Alina's face, not directed at me this time, but at the corridor behind us, where a man in a dark suit had approached James Wu's table and placed something small on the surface in front of him. James looked at it. Then he looked up, directly at Alina from across the room. She took one step backward, the way animals step back when they recognize a predator. I returned to the table. James told me what had been building for months, in the same even, unhurried tone he used for everything. Alina had been approaching members of a Korean real estate investment group, a consortium with significant capital interests in East and West Africa, and making promises on behalf of David's company. Specifically, she had been offering partial ownership of coal industries in exchange for social introductions to James Wu's network. She positioned herself as a decision-maker within the company. She used David's letterhead. She used David's name. The problem was that she had never told David, and James had never agreed. She built an entire arrangement on a foundation that did not exist, James said. The consortium believed they were negotiating with someone who had authority. They did not know they were negotiating with a woman who was inventing her own authority in real time. He continued. The deal was void, he had made sure of that the week before, but the consortium representatives still came tonight expecting to see it finalized. They were in the room. He nodded slightly to his right, toward two men in suits near the bar area. They weren't socializing. They were watching Alina. Does she know the deal is already void? I asked. No, James said. She still believes she is hours away from getting everything she planned. I looked at the clock on the far wall of the ballroom, just past 9:30. What happens at midnight? I asked. James reached into his jacket and produced a small tablet device. He turned it toward me so I could see the document on the screen. It was dense with legal language, but the heading was clear enough. Post-nuptial asset agreement, Coal Industries Holdings. If David signs this before midnight, James said, he loses controlling interest in his own company, permanently. I looked up from the tablet to the far side of the room. David was being guided, very gently, very naturally, through a side door by Alina and the two suited men from the bar. I stood up before I fully decided to. Before I moved, James said one more thing. Zara, sit for one moment. I sat, but barely. When David came to me 4 years ago, he said, his business plan was strong, but his network was thin. It was the West African supply connection that changed everything. He folded his hands on the table. That contact was you. David mentioned your name in the pitch meeting. He said you had spent 2 years building those relationships personally. He looked at me with the particular respect of someone who recognized competence and took it seriously. I funded his company in large part because of your credibility. Alina removed the very person her son's entire enterprise is built on. She did it because she did not know, or did not care, who you actually were. I nodded slowly. Across the room, David and Alina had disappeared behind the side door. The two suited men had followed. This time I stood up, and James didn't stop me. I moved quickly through the edges of the ballroom, staying close to the walls, away from the dance floor. Two of James's men fell into step about 30 feet behind me. The corridor behind the side door was beige and carpeted. I followed the sound of Alina's voice and found them in a private meeting room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open. David was seated at a round conference table. Alina stood behind him with one hand on the back of his chair. The two suited men stood near the far wall. One of them held a pen. The papers were already on the table. I pushed the door open and walked in. The silence was immediate. Elena turned toward me. "You were removed from this event." "I know about the Portugal villa," I said. Her face didn't crumble, but something behind her eyes extinguished. David looked at me, then at the papers in front of him, then at his mother. He still had the pen in his hand. I held his gaze and said quietly, "David, don't sign that." He put the pen down on the table. And that was the moment James, who appeared in the doorway behind me. The room changed when James walked in. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't produce anything dramatic. He simply walked in, looked at the table, looked at Elena, and said, in the same unhurried tone he used for everything, "David, step away from the table." David stood up, immediately, without asking why. Elena straightened. She performed a smile that cost her something. "James, this is a family conversation." "It stopped being a family conversation," James said, "when you used my name to guarantee an arrangement I never agreed to." The two suited men near the wall exchanged a look. One of them reached slowly into his jacket pocket and retrieved a phone. Elena's smile held, but her eyes did the calculation I was beginning to recognize as her default response to threat, not panic, not retreat, but repositioning. "James," she said, softer now, "everything I did to protect my son's interests. You know what this market needs. You know that David needs the right partnerships." "David needs the truth," James said. Elena looked at her son. David was watching her from across the table with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not the softened, guilty look he usually gave her. Something harder. Something that had been forming for a long time and had finally found the shape to take. "What arrangement?" David said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. James placed his tablet on the table, opened to a set of financial documents, and turned it toward David. "Your mother has been withdrawing from coal industries through a series of shell companies for 4 years, James said. "The total is significant. It has been labeled as consulting fees, renovation expenses, and operational costs." He turned to the next screen. "She has also been negotiating on behalf of your company with a real estate consortium without your knowledge or authorization, using your letterhead and your signature, which appears to have been copied from an earlier legal document." David stared at the screen. "The post-nuptial agreement you were about to sign," James continued, "would have transferred controlling interest in coal industries to a holding entity that your mother controls through one of those shell companies." The room was completely still. Elena's face was extraordinary to watch. She didn't beg, she didn't break, she reframed. "Everything I built," she said, her voice low and earnest, "I built for you. The debts after your father died, do you have any idea what I carried alone? I kept us from losing everything. I kept you in school. I kept your father's name intact. And yes, I made decisions, but every single one of them was for you." "The villa in Portugal," David said. He sounded like he was reading from a list. "The shell companies, the signature." "For you," she repeated. "Sophia," David said. He didn't phrase it as a question. He just said her name like a sentence that finished itself. Elena said nothing. David stepped back from the table, then he turned toward the door. "Where is Sophia?" Sophia was already in the corridor. She appeared in the doorway before David reached it, still in her wedding gown, carrying a manila folder. She looked at David, not with accusation, not with triumph, but with honesty. "I found out 3 months ago," she said, "about how we met, about what your mother arranged." She held out the folder. "These are the messages between her and the consultant. My mother showed me after someone sent them to her anonymously." She paused. "I don't know if what we have is real or if it's something we've been handed, but I know I don't want to find out while standing on top of a lie." David took the folder. He opened it. He read for approximately 30 seconds, then closed it. The two consortium men had moved toward the doorway. The taller one was on his phone. I watched his expression and understood from the tension in his jaw that he was reporting back to someone. "How much did she promise them?" I asked James quietly. Enough, he said. Alina had been watching David read the folder. Now she turned toward me, and I saw something in her expression shift, not toward remorse, but toward strategy. You, she said, her voice had changed. The cold politeness was gone. What replaced it was almost businesslike. You have connections that matter. The West African networks, I know that now. She tilted her head. I'm prepared to offer you a formal partnership role. Your name, your network, your credibility combined with the structures I've already built. Stop, I said. She stopped. I looked at her for a moment. You threw me out of this building tonight because of how I look, in front of 400 people, and now you want my name on your deal. I paused. What you're describing is not a partnership. It's a new way of using me. Alina said nothing. I looked at James. He reached into his jacket and placed a USB drive on the table. He opened the drive's contents on his tablet and turned it toward Alina. She looked at the screen. For the first time all night, she went completely still. It was a life insurance policy, on David's life, taken out 2 years ago, with Alina listed as the sole beneficiary. The signature at the bottom was David's, but the date of signing didn't match any event David could account for, and the handwriting was not quite right. Nobody in the room spoke for a long time. It didn't prove intent. James was careful to say that plainly, but it reframed everything that had come before, every controlled situation, every manufactured dependency, every eliminated friend, every person moved off the board before they could say I knew him before all of this. David looked at the document for a long time. When he lifted his eyes to his mother, the expression on his face was not rage. It was something quieter and in some ways worse. The look of a man who has just understood that he lost something years ago without knowing. Leave, he said. Alina opened her mouth. Leave, louder this time, still controlled, but with a weight behind it that made everyone in the room understand this was not negotiable. She walked toward the door, past David without touching him, past me without looking at me, stopped, one hand on the door frame. She turned and looked directly at me. You think this is a victory, she said. You've only made an enemy. Then she walked out. The door swung shut behind her. In the silence that followed Alina's exit, one of the consortium men cleared his throat and said, very carefully, that they would need to discuss the matter of their initial deposit. Their group had provided Alina with a preliminary payment, a confirmation of good faith while the larger arrangement was being finalized. With the deal now collapsed and Alina's legal exposure becoming clearer by the minute, that deposit was in question. They were polite about it the way people are polite when they have lawyers on standby. James handled them efficiently. He told them a revised arrangement would be discussed at a proper meeting, not at a wedding, and that the initial deposit would be addressed through correct channels. He said it with the particular firmness of someone who knows that being generous tonight costs less than being contested tomorrow. The two men nodded, exchanged numbers with one of James's team, and retreated back toward the ballroom. David was still standing near the conference table, the insurance document on the surface in front of him. Sophia had come fully into the room and was standing close to him, not touching, just present. I want to ask you something, David said. He was talking to me. I looked at him. When you walked in here tonight, he said, when you said don't sign that, how much did you know? Enough, I said. He nodded slowly. I'm going to need time to understand all of it, to figure out what's real and what wasn't. He looked at Sophia, then back at me. But I wanted to say while we're in this room before we go back out there that you were right, about all of it for a long time. I held that for a moment. I know, I said. You can thank me later. Right now you have 400 people waiting for you in a ballroom, and I think at least some of them deserve a real reception. Sophia almost smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. By the time we returned to the main hall, the absence of Alina Cole had begun to move through the room the way a current moves through water, invisibly, but you could see its effect on everything it touched. Her social allies were quietly gathering near the bar, performing casualness while clearly trying to determine what they had missed. A journalist named Patricia Wusu, who had attended as a personal guest of the bride's family, had her notebook out. She wasn't hiding it. 2 of David's board members were on their phones in the far corner of the room. James Wu returned to the private table and said nothing for several minutes. He seemed content to observe, the way a person who has arranged an outcome is content to watch it settle into place. "The consortium representatives will file a civil claim against her," James said eventually. "Within the week, I'd estimate." "She told me I'd made an enemy," I said. "People who have lost say things like that," he said. "It gives them something to carry out of the room." He turned back to me. "How are you?" It was such a simple question that I didn't know what to do with it immediately. "I've been better," I said, "but I've also been worse." He nodded. Then, "I have a proposal, not tonight, but I'd like to discuss it soon." He told me the outline before the night ended. The West Africa expansion that David had pitched to him, the one built on my network, my relationships, my 2 years of work, was still viable. The consortium remained interested in the region, and James had been looking for a structure to support that expansion without the complications that now surrounded coal industries. "I would like to consider a separate entity," he said, "properly structured, with the right leadership." He paused. "I am not offering you a title in someone else's organization. I am suggesting that you consider building your own." "Why me?" I said. "Because your name opened the doors that made the opportunity real," he said. "Because you walked back into a room tonight after being publicly humiliated, and you handled yourself with more composure and more strategic intelligence than most people I employ." He picked up his glass. "And because when I offer you the chance to be added to an existing deal, your instinct is to ask for something better." I thought about the offer. Then I thought about the marble floor and my invitation card lying face up on the ground. "I'll think about it," I said. James nodded as if he had expected nothing less and nothing more. From across the room, Sophia caught my eye from the dance floor where she and David were moving slowly to a quieter song. She gave me a small nod, not a question, not a signal, just acknowledgement. "I see you. I'm glad you're here." I raised my glass slightly. Then my phone buzzed with a news alert. A tabloid had already posted a photograph of the arrivals. "Korean business titan James Wu attends private wedding, mystery guest spotted at his table all evening." Underneath, a blurred photo. My face was partially visible. My phone began ringing almost immediately. I didn't answer most of the calls that night. By the time I got home at 2 in the morning, my voicemail had 11 messages, 2 from journalists, 3 from people I barely knew who had clearly seen the tabloid photo, 1 from a former colleague who said she had always believed in me, and 1 from Marcus. Marcus Addo was my business partner, had been for 3 years. We ran a small logistics consultancy together, nothing enormous but steady. He knew my history with David. He had met a leaner once at an industry event. He was, I had believed, one of the 5 people in the world I actually trusted. His voicemail said, "Hey, saw the photo. Looks like it was an interesting night. Call me when you can." Something in his voice didn't sit right. I couldn't name it then. I thought I was tired and overthinking. I called him back the next morning. He answered on the second ring. He was friendly, curious, asking questions that seemed natural. How was the wedding? Was I okay after being removed? He had heard about that, apparently. Was I really sitting with James Wu? What did they talk about? Too many questions, too quickly. I answered vaguely and ended the call. 2 hours later, James called me. He asked if I was free to meet. When I arrived at the hotel lobby he had suggested, he had a single printed page waiting on the table. It was a transcript of a conversation. I recognized the names. One of them was mine. The other was Eleanor Cole. The third was Marcus Addo. I sat down slowly. "When?" I said. 2 months ago, James said. He contacted her through a mutual professional connection. He provided her with personal details about your relationship with David, your history, the nature of the friendship, conversations that only someone close to you would know. He kept his voice even. He framed you as a romantic liability. He suggested that your continued proximity to David posed a threat to Aliner's plans. He paused. He received a referral fee. I looked at the transcript. Marcus, 3 years of partnership, my morning coffee person, the one I called when a client was difficult, the one I had trusted with every piece of my professional life and a significant portion of my personal one. How much? I said. James named a figure. It was not a large amount. It was almost insulting in its smallness. I didn't call Marcus that day. I needed to think clearly, and thinking clearly required sitting with the information until the initial wave of hurt moved through me completely. I called him the following morning. He answered the way he always answered, casual, warm. I asked him to meet me at our office. He said sure. When he walked in and saw my face, he understood immediately. He had the look of a person who has been waiting for a door to open and has rehearsed what to say but forgets every word the moment it does. I placed the transcript on the desk between us. He looked at it. He did not deny it. Zara, I thought. You thought what? I said. He started to explain. The explanation involved words like opportunity, and I didn't think it would go that far, and she told me it was just a social introduction. He said he was sorry. He said it multiple times. He looked genuinely devastated, the way people look when the full cost of a decision becomes real. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "We built something real, Marcus, and you sold it for a number that won't change your life." I opened my desk drawer and placed an envelope in front of him. Inside was a letter of dissolution, a buyout offer at fair market value for his share of the consultancy. Every number was correct. Every term was fair. "I'll give you 2 weeks to review it with your lawyer," I said. He stared at the envelope. Zara. Marcus, I said his name the way you say something that is finished. "We're done." He picked up the envelope. He didn't say anything else. He left. 3 weeks after the wedding, Aliner Coles surfaced publicly for the first time. The civil case filed by the consortium had moved quickly. The Portuguese villa had been identified as an asset connected to the shell company structure. A tax irregularity inquiry had been opened separately. Her social circle had thinned considerably. Her calls to 2 of David's board members went unreturned. David called on a Thursday evening and asked if he could come by my apartment. He arrived looking like someone who had been doing hard emotional work for 3 weeks and was beginning to see the shape of something on the other side of it. He sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and told me he had been in therapy, that Sophia and he had started couples counseling, that he had been in conversation with a forensic accountant about the financial damage. "She called me last week," he said, "asked me to post bail. There was some kind of tax compliance issue." I looked at him. "I didn't," he said. I needed to tell someone who would understand all of it." He wrapped his hands around the mug, someone who knew me before. We sat quietly for a moment. "You need to build boundaries with her," I said. "Not punishment, boundaries for your own sake." He nodded. "I know." "And you need to stop making decisions based on guilt," I said. "That's what she built her whole system on, your guilt." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I know that too." We didn't fix 13 years of everything in one kitchen conversation, but we named the damage honestly, and that was somewhere real to start. Sophia and David held a small, private dinner 6 weeks after the wedding. Not for press, not for business, for the 12 people who had actually shown up for them as individuals, as human beings, rather than for their combined social and financial profile. I was invited. James Wu sent a plant, a very elegant one, and a note that said he admired their decision. At some point during the evening, David stood and said something that I don't think he had planned to say. He said that for most of his adult life he had confused control with love. He said his mother had taught him that love was about management, managing outcomes, managing people, managing image. He said he was learning, slowly and imperfectly, what love actually looked like when it was not transactional. He looked at Sophia when he said it. She reached for his hand. He looked at me when he finished. I lifted my glass. After dinner, a car came to take me home. In the back seat, I opened my phone. Patricia Wusu's substantive piece had published the week prior, focused on the business angle, the consortium, the collapse of the arrangement. My name appeared in it once, briefly, as a business associate of David Cole, whose removal from the event preceded James Wu's arrival. It was barely a mention. But somehow it was enough. My inbox had 32 new messages. 12 were from people in my industry. 7 were from international contacts I had not spoken to in months. 4 were from journalists. 2 were from investors I had never met. And 1 was from James Wu's office with a proposed meeting date for the following Tuesday. Tuesday came. James Wu's office was on the 14th floor of a building in the financial district. Clean lines, sparse furniture, a view of the waterfront that looked like something from a design magazine. We talked for 2 hours. I came in with my own documents, my own numbers, my own proposal, drafted over 3 weeks with 2 lawyers and a financial advisor I had cold called. I was not asking to be added to James's deal. I was proposing a partnership between his network and my entity, separate structures, shared objectives, clearly defined terms. James read through my proposal in silence. Then he looked up and said, "There's one thing I'd change." I said, "Tell me." He pointed to Clause 7. The exit terms, they're weighted too conservatively in my favor. Adjust them to reflect equal leverage on both sides. I stared at him. "You're negotiating against yourself," I said. "I'm establishing the terms I want," he said, "which include a partner who isn't structurally disadvantaged from the first day." He turned the document back toward me. "Revise Clause 7. Send it to my office by Thursday. If we're aligned, we sign Friday." I took the document. I kept my expression steady and professional for the remainder of the meeting. In the elevator going down, alone, I allowed myself exactly 15 seconds of something close to joy. Then I put my shoulders back and started drafting the revision in my head. I signed the partnership agreement on a Friday afternoon in March, 6 months after the wedding. 4 months after Marcus had walked out of our shared office with a buyout envelope. 3 months after Alina Cole's civil case had been formally filed. The signing was not a large event. James, 2 members of his legal team, my own lawyer, and a notary. No champagne, no photographs. James shook my hand. His grip was firm. "Welcome," he said. He didn't specify what I was being welcomed to. He didn't need to. I returned to my apartment and called my mother in Accra. She listened to the full story. She was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then she said, "You know what your grandmother used to say." I smiled. "I know." She said, "The person who closes the door on you is just telling you which room was too small." We talked for another hour. After I hung up, I sat at my desk in the quiet. There was a knock at my door that evening. A woman I didn't recognize, well-dressed, my age, with a careful way of holding herself. She introduced herself as Angela Cole, Alina's younger sister. I hadn't known Alina had a sister. Angela said Alina had asked her to deliver something. She held out a sealed envelope. I took it. "Is she okay?" I said. I surprised myself by asking. Angela considered the question honestly. "No," she said, "but she's managing." She paused. "She asked me to say that she doesn't expect anything from you." I nodded. Angela left. I placed the envelope on my desk and made dinner. I washed the dishes, folded some laundry, answered 3 emails. Then I sat back down and opened the envelope. It was handwritten on plain paper. No letterhead, no diamonds, no performance. "Zara, I am not writing this to ask for forgiveness. I don't believe I have earned that, and I'm not certain I know how to ask for it properly. I am writing because something my sister said to me last week has stayed in my mind. She said I spent so many years being afraid of losing everything that I turned into the thing I was afraid of. I don't know if that's true. I know that the choices I made felt at the time like protection, like necessity. I convinced myself that removing obstacles was the same as building a path. You were never the obstacle I told myself you were. You were the mirror I kept turning away from, because you knew my son before I had finished building the version of him that needed me, and that frightened me more than I knew how to manage. I am not asking for a response. I don't expect one. I wanted to say this while I still had the clarity to say it. Eleanor. I read it twice, then I folded it carefully and set it down. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel warmth, exactly. What I felt was something older and quieter, the particular peace that comes when you stop needing someone to understand what they did to you, and then, suddenly, unexpectedly, they do. I would not respond right away. Maybe not for a long time, but I would not throw the letter away. I turned back to my laptop. The incorporation documents for the new entity were open on the screen. The name of the company waited in a text field at the top of the page. I had been going back and forth on it for weeks. Now I knew. I typed it in and hit save. Mensa Infrastructure Partners. The launch event happened 7 months later, in Lagos. I had been back and forth between Lagos and London 4 times in the preceding months, building, meeting, confirming, adjusting. My mother had come to the site walkthrough of the first contracted project and stood with her hands clasped in front of her while engineers presented figures, and she had nodded the way she nodded at things she had always expected, but was still glad to see confirmed. The launch event was a working dinner, 40 people around a long table, investors, partners, supply chain leads, 2 members of the consortium who had agreed to the restructured deal, and a handful of journalists including Patricia Wusu, who arrived early and had sharp questions about the operational model that I answered plainly and at length. David came. He sat near the middle of the table and applauded with the rest of the room when I spoke. Sophia was beside him. They looked like 2 people still in the process of becoming something, not finished, not certain, but genuinely choosing. James Wu sent a gift in advance. A wooden box containing a single bottle of wine and a handwritten card that said, "You never needed a seat at someone else's table." He did not come. He didn't need to. He had already done what he came to do, which was not to rescue me or manage me, but to make sure the right doors opened and then step back and let me walk through them myself. At the end of the evening, Patricia found me by the window. "One question," she said. "Off the record if you prefer." "On the record is fine," I said. "The night of the wedding," she said. "When you were removed from the entrance, what did you feel in that moment?" I looked out at Lagos, the lights of the city catching on the water in the distance, the skyline doing what it always did, which was insist on itself regardless of what the day had brought. "I felt like the room was too small," I said. Patricia wrote it down. "A woman who sells envelopes does not become her envelope. My grandmother said that. And it has followed me my whole life, through rooms that tried to contain me, through people who measured me by what they could see rather than what I carried, through nights like the one at the Grand Meridian when I stood on stone steps in a green dress and felt the particular humiliation of being measured and found, by someone's small standards, insufficient. Eleanor Cole measured me by what I looked like walking through a doorway. She was wrong. I have a company now, a real one, not a favor, not a footnote in someone else's success story. Something built from my name, my network, my 2 years of Lagos mornings and difficult conversations and calls I made and kept. Something mine. David is doing the work. Slowly, imperfectly, the way real repair happens. Marcus sent a brief message after the launch event. "Congratulations. You earned this." I read it and put my phone down and went back to work. James and I have a meeting next Thursday. And I still have the invitation card somewhere. The cream one with the gold lettering. The one that fell on the marble floor the night they walked me out. I kept it, not as a wound, not as a reminder of what was done to me. As a reminder of what I had to walk away from before I could walk toward anything that mattered. I didn't need their table. I built a whole floor. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that you were never the problem in a room that was simply too small for you, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching this from. What country, what city, let me know you were here. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, please do it right now. Every single week, I bring you stories exactly like this one. Stories of quiet strength, of people who were underestimated and chose to build anyway, of the dignity it takes to keep going after someone closes a door in your face. Hit subscribe. Share this with one person who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment. I read every single one. I will see you in the next story.